I think for parents, especially of adolescents, it can be a challenging time because there's so much that they are having to work through. I think particularly in this environment and this climate, this particular time in human history,
Yeah.
where they are um, overwhelmed with access to information.
Mm,
Um, not and a lot of it is not actually good information or real true information.
Right.
mhm,
They are trying to find their identity outside of their parents and outside
yeah.
of everything that has been given to them. They
Yeah.
can see the flaws in the society that they're being handed. They can see where the climate is going. They can see the hypocrisy in the church. They can see all of these things. And they also can feel the things that they did feel maybe while they were in church. And so there's a real, I think, tension that they are often working through during that stage of development. And it requires, I think, a lot of patience. I think sometimes it requires some degree of letting go of the idea that we can control
Mhm.
who they will be, um,
Mhm.
and how they will be. I think that just speaking for myself as a parent can be a very painful thing to just reconcile that, like, at the end of the day, like, I actually cannot control who this other human being is going to be
Right.
and who they're going to become.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hope Health Community. We are changing the branding. I'm Rasheeta, and
I'm Rochelle.
yay! So we wanted to let you know that we love to have you here, but we felt like it was important to change the calm part of our brand to community because we're part of your community and you're a part of our community. So, Rochelle, can you give us a little bit of um, a little taste of what we're gonna have going on today?
Yes, thank y'all for being here again. So we have a guest speaker. Again, we always focus on community wisdom. And so one of our guest speakers today is Dr. Aza Alsab, and he is an artist, a neuroscientist, and a psychiatrist. He researches social cognition, music, mindfulness, and psychedelics. And he's currently an assistant professor at Yale and Howard University, and he's a director of the Center for Collective Healing at Howard. So we are so blessed to have him.
Yeah.
Cannot wait to get into his head about all the things related to, neuroscience and music. I
Yeah.
think we're really thrilled to kind of hear about how those things intersect and the work that he's doing.
Absolutely. So, without further ado, I think we're going to have Dr. Aza come in with us so that we can get this party started and definitely capitalize on the opportunity to have him present, given his busy schedule. So, we're going to welcome him into the room.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for attending. I guess we really want to start out by asking a little bit about you from your own perspective. Like, just describe who you are and your journey in the academic space.
Yeah. Well, like I said, thanks for having me. I am someone who is very passionate, um, and really as a child, that showed up in my love for music and science, and that has always been like the case. Um, and when it came to science, I was always interested in the life process, like, how
Mhm.
do animals know how to behave the way that they behave? Like,
Mhm.
how does a plant know that's supposed to grow in a certain way? Or just these, I think, just really fascinating things about life. So that led me to like really be interested in biology,
Mhm.
which I ended up really loving in high school and ended up being my major in college. But then also with music, I grew up in the Black church, Seventh Day Adventist church, and my dad
Mm.
was a minister. I grew up playing music in church, as a church musician. So I knew that there was something very powerful about music from a
Yeah.
very young age. And I was good at it. So I kept pursuing it and really loved it. But they
Mhm.
always felt like very separate and distinct pathways.
Yeah.
Um, and really, as I got more into science and realized like you could have a career where you do research and
Mhm.
ask questions, and that that could be applied to things like health and medicine,
Mhm.
I decided to pursue an MD PhD. Um, so I went to Boston at Harvard and MIT to do my MD PhD. And while there, I was still doing music and really started becoming a professional musician. You know,
Wow.
I was playing at different churches, choir director,
Oh,
you know,
nice.
minister of music. Um,
Mhm.
but again, there was just this tension between like the two parts of myself, the artist and the physician scientist.
Right.
And that really wasn't fulfilling for me. And it was a source of inner tension, really. And so around the end of med school, I launched my career as an independent artist and really started to try to integrate that myself and say, like, I can be both
Mhm.
a serious professional within the medical and scientific academic space and also be a real musician and pursue that as a part of my career, which came with a lot of challenges, but it also came with a much greater sense of integration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I did my PhD in neuroscience because I mean the brain is the coolest organ, and so it was natural to kind of pursue that. But again, I can think this idea of behavior, like how do we know how to behave, or why do we
Mhm.
behave in certain ways? And the brain is really the seed of that in a very powerful and profound way. So I wanted to really dig into that, particularly as it relates to social behavior.
Mhm.
How are we able to process other people and adapt to the signals that we're getting, which is a very kind of complex sort of
Mhm.
information to take in compared to some of the other stimulus that we have to represent. Um, and so when I got back to med school, that led me to thinking about a number of different things, but psychiatry was just such a natural fit. The
Yeah.
stories that I was hearing and dealing with, and the profound both pain, but also profound ways that you could help people within
Mhm.
that field, really resonated with me. It also was a field where I felt like there was the most frontier that was still undiscovered,
Mhm.
compared to a lot of other areas of medicine. And it was an area that seemed like it really needed the most science to progress.
Mhm.
And so I felt like there was also a really ripe opportunity there. So I ended up going to Yale to do my psychiatry residency. And uh, while in residency, I started to see that there was really a profound opportunity for the arts in healing that seemed to really still be on the fringe of clinical practice. And
Mhm.
as a musician, and again, just from my lived experience, knowing the power that it had in my own life,
Yeah.
and to really look for ways to be able to integrate that. And as I said, growing up in the church and just being very attuned to the spiritual world, spiritual dimension,
Mhm.
led me to meditation and mindfulness, and that also had a very profound impact on my development. And so just these things started to intersect in very curious and interesting ways. And again, in residency was really when I started to think about the role of psychedelics in healing, with a lot of the just data that was coming out for just very impactful results in PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction. And so I got certified in psychedelic assisted therapy and research, and really coming out of residency, started a research program where we study music, mindfulness, and psychedelics, and the ways that they can help treat mental health symptoms across a variety of diagnoses, but also help humans to solve coordination challenges and polarization crises. And so I do research in that sphere, and I have a small practice where I see patients. I direct a crisis center, and
Mhm.
as an artist, have really sort of developed my art form in a way where I now really am integrating everything that I've learned as a scientist and a physician into what I'm also doing as an artist. And it's just been really um, a blessing, and I've been really grateful to see how my career has just become more and more integrated, where the work I do as a physician scientist really relies a lot on who I am as an artist. And I really kind of consider myself an artist first, because
Mhm.
that ability to
Okay.
um, both view the reality and document it, but also envision and create possible futures, I think is core to what an artist is. And I really bring that into my work as a physician scientist. Um, and then, as an artist, bringing in the science and what I know from my practice as a psychiatrist, so that when people come to my shows, it's an experience that's not only entertainment, but they're getting healing in that experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do now, and I have a family, as Rochelle said, a number of kids, and yeah, just trying to balance my life with that and
I know, right?
my career.
The balance in the attempt to balance is real.
Do you know that the word balance starts to give me anxiety?
Sorry,
No,
I didn't
no,
know. I
no,
didn't know.
no,
I didn't
because
know.
it's like it just feels so elusive. It just feels like unattainable at this point, right? But I
Yeah.
think what I love about what you're saying is integration.
Mm-hmm.
And my new word is alignment, right? So it may
Mhm.
not be balanced, it may be a little bit stretched beyond capacity sometimes, but there is an alignment. And I think what you described about your career so far is how at this point there the things are aligning, and you were really intentional about that, and I would say even brave, because so often we learn that science and art is separate,
Yeah.
right? And so if you love to write, if you love to read, then you probably don't like math, and or if you love
Mhm.
biology and earth sciences, then you're probably not going to appreciate even psychology, right? Like there's just all these silos that are put together in the way that the disciplines are separated.
Yeah.
And even as children, we learn to separate ourselves based on what we're good at. But
Mm-hmm.
then what you fought for is that you realize, like, I'm good at this on the weekends, and then I'm good at this during school. And I don't want to separate myself like that. And so you fought for that integration and alignment. And I love that part so
You
much, because I think children need to hear this. They
Mm-hmm.
need to hear that you don't have to be one or the other, that we're all these things. And I really believe everybody has art and science in them.
I
It's
agree.
just that we've been forced to pull this out and pull that out. But if you really talk to people and get to know human beings, I mean, there's an artistry in all of us. There's a scientist in
Absolutely.
all of us.
Absolutely.
So at that alone just really, beyond the balancing act of it all, which is difficult, but the integration of it is really impressive and profound.
And you can see it in kids, right? Like children, when they're young, before they've been fully indoctrinated and conditioned,
Mm-hmm.
they really do all of it, right? They
Yeah.
ask why. They want to know how things work. They want to
Yeah.
experiment. What happens if I do this? What
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
happens if I do that? That is science. They
Yes.
create. You give them, you don't even have to tell them to do that. They will create on their own. And so I think it is really inherent in being a human being, to have both an artist and a scientist in you.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying everyone has to be a scientist as a career, but
Right.
Right.
that way of engaging in the world, I think is
Exactly.
inherent to being a human.
Yeah.
100%. The curiosity, the
Mm-hmm.
critical thinking, the
Yeah.
wanting to see, if I do this, what will happen
Yeah.
next. So even that sort of
Mm-hmm.
experimental thought process, is fantastic.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit because I've been extremely intrigued with the the foundation that you expressed about growing up in church and
Mhm.
those things around music. And I know in a lot of times in our culture that the church is foundational to a lot of musicians, even in the industry, etc. So I too, I sung in a couple of groups and this and that in church, love, sung in the choir. So very evident. And actually, my children's father is a producer and he does a lot of music too. So music has always been pretty just interwoven into the fabric of my life too. So I certainly appreciate it. So I had a couple of questions around that, and I really
Yeah.
hope we can dialogue. So I did an article just because I too believe that music it has extreme influence and even beyond the physical. I think it has such spiritual implications and can impact beyond what we can imagine, right? And so I have spiritual context to that, and I'm sure you know, but I wanted to even kind of go there a little bit, where in 1 Samuel 16:14, when it talks about David and when he played for King Saul, and when Saul was tormented by an evil spirit. And so I wondered, and you mentioned even your desire to continue to play in atmospheres for healing. So for you, the healing part, I understand. Do you also feel like your playing of music also in some ways speak to something similar to what David was charged with Saul, kind of that torment, or if there's an evil presence? Do you? I kind of want to go a little bit in that realm, if you're okay with that. So.
Yeah, it's actually the alignment, to bring up your word, Rochelle, is amazing, because as you were talking about that, I immediately started thinking about David and Saul. I've actually
Mm,
been doing my personal study this month. I'm on a fast, and as a part of that fast, I've been reading First and Second Samuel, so it's
mm.
very fresh in my mind right now. And my line name is David, so there's a lot of
Oh
there's a lot of things
wow,
there.
that was meant
Um,
for me to ask that question,
yeah,
huh?
yeah. So no, I think music is inherently spiritual. It
Yeah,
opens up portals
yeah.
and dimensions, and allows a certain form of energy
Mm-hmm.
into a space, and that is in multiple different ways, not only in a necessarily a positive way, but that I think
Mm,
the equivalent is also true, right, in a negative
Right.
way. And so for me, because so much of my early musical experiences were explicitly within a church context,
mm-hmm.
that sound is very inherent in how I play the piano and how I sing and how I think about writing. So
Mm-hmm.
even when I'm not explicitly, the content isn't explicitly talking about God or naming that, the energy behind what I'm doing is really infused with that energy, and coming from a spiritual place. And I look at music as a way of inspiring, uplifting, and really bringing in a certain energy that facilitates the healing process. And
Mm,
so for me, that's very much a part of um, what I'm thinking about when I'm playing in church, or in more secular contexts, when I have shows in different places.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think people can feel that. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I may not name it, because if you put a certain name to something, it can cause maybe resistance in people
Sure,
who have had either trauma or different experiences that cause them to be closed to certain language.
sure.
But the energy is certainly felt. And even one of the things that we study is music mindfulness. And obviously mindfulness practices, while they can be sort of secularized into clinical context and therapeutic context, those
Mm-hmm.
practices really derived from a spiritual philosophy and a
Yes.
spiritual, way of viewing the world. And again, music and sound, and how that uh,
Mm-hmm.
creates a supportive environment for certain states of mind and certain states of being, I think is really critical. And so, yeah, I think a lot about how we can leverage music to facilitate spiritual processes that allow people to engage in healing.
And I appreciate you saying music and sound, because I think that sometimes again, how we speak about things and language or labels
Hmm.
can be limiting, because sound is for music is a form of sound, but there are
Mhm.
sounds that vibrations and frequencies, all of those things do play a part in what you're describing. So I appreciate you kind of outlining that. And I also wanted to, just since on the topic, and I'll let you jump in, Rochelle, just mindfulness, if you could give just a brief definition of what that is.
Mm,
Not everyone, I've heard it, but
yeah.
just I would love to hear what you define it as.
Yeah. Mindfulness for me is a very broad term
Mhm.
that captures a number of different practices that allow someone to be um, in the present moment, with non-judgmental awareness of what is happening in that moment.
Okay. All right.
I love that.
Yeah.
I studied mindfulness for several years in the Buddhist tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But, as a Christian growing up, I was afraid to tell people that.
Mm.
And so, um, obviously, I'm not afraid anymore. Right?
You're out.
There.
you know but the truth is that even in scripture there is mindfulness. It's just not called that, but
Oh,
meditation is all throughout the Bible, so it's not like it was so disparate like that they were conflicting. At least not for me. It didn't feel conflicting to me. It actually helped me feel more grounded in my
Mhm.
Christianity, interestingly enough, because of this the solitude that mindfulness sometimes requires, right? But I want to talk about like the tension of science and art still a little bit, because as much as I think we're all in agreement that they're not as separate as we make them feel, I think when it comes to healing, there is distinctions that scientists make and that spirit and religious people make, right? So for instance, like you will in a religious community, they will want to pray first with a lot of things, particularly any
Mhm.
sort of mental illness or mental crisis.
Yeah.
um, in the scientific world, medical doctors, clinicians, researchers, social scientists, social workers, etc., they're looking at behavioral therapy, they're looking at potential medication, they're
mhm.
looking at, right? And so there's more of a scientific route than a spiritual route.
Mhm.
I'm the scientist that sees the blend of both the spirit and the science. I think of the creator as a scientist. I mean, it's hard to not see science in
Yes.
life, right? Like what you saw as a child. I felt the same way. It felt a lot more artistic to me, and then I realized many how many mathematical equations are showing up in nature, right? But so like when you think about this now, like you're in that space of where you have a crisis clinic, you're working with young people who are dealing with mental illness and mental health crises. How do you approach that with the integration of the work that you do?
Yeah, I think it really, so as an integrative psychiatrist, I really have to meet someone where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, at the core of all healing processes, there is a spiritual process happening, whether or not
Absolutely.
someone is aware of it,
I know
or
it.
whether or not they have the tools or the experiences to observe it or not.
Mhm.
But there's also things happening at the psychological level. There's also things happening at the biological level, and all these things are interconnected, right?
Yes.
And so I think depending on where someone is in their journey, I start with where the opening is, right? So if the biology is where they can resonate and be grounded, then let's start with the biology and see how we can get to these other levels. If it's the psyche and they're very sort of cognitive and that's where things are, then we'll start there. If they're very spiritual, then we'll start there. And if people are more integrated across those dimensions, then we can kind of have a more rounded view of the process as a whole. But for me, I think, understanding that all these things are happening simultaneously at these different levels of analysis, and that the more that we can, and I see the spiritual level as the deepest level because it's maybe the most subtle or hardest
That's
to
right.
observe, you
Yes.
know. But if we can get to that level, I think you have the most profound ability to not even only access healing and facilitate healing, but also engage in what's happening at the other levels in a more thorough, way. So
Yeah.
yes, some people might need their SSRI in order to get to a place where they can access the psychospiritual
Mhm.
information and work with it in a certain way, right?
Mm.
Some people might need therapy to clear out some things cognitively for them to be able to then ask those spiritual deeper questions.
Wow.
um and so I think I look at it in that way, and depending on who I'm working with and where they are and what they have going on, um that kind of will inform what path I take. There are people who I've met who are on all of the medications. They're on an
Mhm.
SSRI, they're on an antipsychotic, they're on a benzo, they need a sleeping medication, and they still have symptoms.
Wow.
That tells me that there's something going on that isn't about the biology, because that just doesn't, like, we've hit all the receptors,
Right.
right? Like the biology has
Yeah.
been taken care of, yet this problem
Yeah.
still exists. So that tells
Yeah.
me the genesis of this really, might be deeper. And again, they may or may not be able to access it, just depending on where they are in their journey and what experiences they have. But I think those clear examples to me are proof of concept that, like, sometimes it's not just the biological, even if the biological is involved, there are deeper levels of injury, deeper levels of trauma that have to be addressed for someone's symptoms to be, for their symptoms to be relieved. And in the same way, sometimes you can get straight to the spiritual
That's what I'm
there,
thinking.
and that will take care of
Of
the
all
psyche
the
and the
other.
biology, and shift
Yes.
the biology and the psychology.
This is so fascinating because I'm thinking about community that I grew up in as a Black person, right? And how we went to the spirit first, right? So my grandfather would pray first, and then, yes, if the symptoms are there, psychiatrists, etc. But the praying never stopped. And so, if when you're dealing with a community that the deepest level, as you're describing it, is the spiritual, but that's their first entry point. I've also seen where it's the first entry point and it remains the last, meaning that they don't believe that they need the additional support the science, right? And so that's where we have barriers in Black communities where it's like, God is going to fix this. And I'm like, well, the brain is an organ and we can manage the brain scientifically in addition to the prayer, the fasting, all those really important spiritual tools. But how do you manage communities, families in particular, because that's what we focus on, like parents and the community itself, when the entry point is always the spiritual, especially when it comes to the brain. When you notice that, like when somebody breaks their hand, nobody in church is like, let's pray over that hand.
And
But if
that's it.
somebody has, some mental health crises and they're showing symptoms of psychosis, etc., it immediately becomes demon possession, right? And then we want to pray about that. And I'm not saying that demon possession is not there. I'm just saying, the boundary and the barrier to get to the science, we're kind of like on the opposite, right? Where I think in other communities, they may go to the science first and then take a long time to accept that this is also a spiritual condition, right? I think in a lot of Black communities, we're the opposite. So how do you approach that?
And this is why I think the brain is the coolest organ. It's so fascinating because it really is the biological bridge between the spirit and the psyche. And so it's, it's easier when I'm dealing with the mind, which we know is very intimately woven with the spirit and the soul, to put it all on, we just need to pray. This is demon possession. This is, obia, whatever the thing is.
We gotta tell Rasheeta what obia is.
Yes, because I'm like, wait a minute, he skipped over there real quick, and then it starts smiling, and I'm like,
I forgot AZA had Jamaican ancestry too.
Trinidad.
Trinidad, that's right. So so obia, Caribbean form of or name for voodoo. I think is the closest thing, right?
Yeah, it's an offshoot of African traditional, spiritual practice.
Which ancestry worship is like huge,
A big
because
thing,
a lot of the stars are doing it now.
And I mean, that's a whole can of worms to get into
That's a whole other podcast.
in terms of
demonized. It's so demonized, and I wish it wasn't.
And not everyone's ready for that conversation with
that's another episode. You gotta come back to that one.
You gotta come back to that one, like for sure.
Exactly. But I think when we look into, so one of the things that fascinates me, right, is that there is this very thin line between the kinds of spiritual manifestations that we see written about in the Bible and in other religious texts and symptoms or signs of psychosis, right? And so there are things that you will read about in the Bible that are demon possession, and they are, checkbook things that you will also see in schizophrenia or psychosis,
Yes.
and vice versa. So there is this very, very thin line.
Hard to
Um,
determine unless you have discernment, right?
and
Mm.
so I think exactly, and I think there are some clear things that we can point
Mm,
to help differentiate.
okay.
But I think part of what I do is to try to ask about what their beliefs are about other things. So if your family member had cancer
Mm-hmm.
and you were recommended to have chemotherapy, would you only pray, or would you pray and also have
Mm,
them do the chemo and the radiation and have the surgery to take out the tumor?
right.
And I would say, like, I know people who really only would
What do
pray,
you
and
do?
there are
That's
people who have
right.
actually died
Yeah.
because that was all that they did, and they did not sort of interface at the actual biological level, right?
Mm,
um and so, I mean, I try to ground it in the fact that there is a brain, there's a biology, and we know that if certain things go wrong in the brain, it
mhm,
will affect the way that we think and the way that we behave, and that the symptoms or the things that they are observing can be caused by things that are happening in the
mm,
brain. And it's
mm,
not to discourage them from prayer, because I think you
Mm.
definitely should pray. But if you have prayed and you are still seeing these things happening, and or they're getting worse, this person is becoming less and less functional,
right.
then I think at that point the encouragement really is to ask, what are the other tools that we have,
Mhm,
to try to address this, and to allow this person to have the kind of functional life that we would want them to have. And so I think trying to make things less unidimensional
mhm,
and seeing
Yeah.
where the window is to
Yes.
to open up space for
Yes.
these different tools that can be leveraged. And I think I think the analogy of the broken bone,
mm,
or the open cut, like, yes,
Yes.
you pray over it, but you probably will put a band-aid on it as
You
well,
definitely
and
will.
some
They don't even pray
gauze,
over no band. People
some
go straight to
alcohol.
the band-aid. They're not.
you know if you
no.
have a fever, I think,
Yeah.
okay, you can do the lemon and ginger and all those things, or you might also take a Tylenol,
Yeah.
or Motrin. So I think those are conversations that I try to have. And again, I think I have certainly learned through my training and through my practice that my role is really to give information, give frameworks, give
Yeah.
levels of understanding. But at the end of the day, I can't make anyone.
Right.
Do
Healing
something.
is something that one has to own for themselves. I'm a
Yes. Love that.
facilitator of the process. I
Mm,
can give you tools, I can accelerate the process, but if that person isn't willing to engage in that process, there's really nothing that I can do.
That's
mm.
right.
I and as the facilitator of the process, I want to kind of go there and talk about kind of how you maintain your level of wellness. And you mentioned that you're fasting. And so I wonder about your preparation to be able to touch these multidimensional aspects and
Mm.
your process of making sure that you're able to do that in a way that it doesn't continue to drain you. So how do you get
Ooh,
renewed,
that's good.
and how do you maintain your own wellness? And fasting may be one of those, but I
Mhm.
just was curious about that because I know dealing in the spiritual realm, physical for sure, like, your day-to-day patients and the busy hustle and bustle of that, but definitely dealing in the spiritual realm requires levels of rejuvenation and kind of like, so I wonder how you do that for yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that is it is an ongoing journey. So I think having some daily practice for me, meditation, prayer, yoga, reading, spiritual texts, those are all critical. Music, obviously, is a big part of it. Other art forms, painting, uh,
Mm,
plant medicines, um, all these different things, I think, are a part of the toolkit.
okay.
And I've learned and have observed that as we progress in life, as we progress in our spiritual journey,
Mm,
we require more and more strength in our spiritual person
mhm,
to engage in the warfare essentially,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's like if you are engaged in a certain type of work, the devil, the devil, I think that's again is a very that's a whole concept in and of itself.
Mhm.
But the negative forces are not going to just allow certain things to happen
Right.
without a fight, right? And
Exactly.
so I
Exactly.
think for me, when I observe certain things happening in my own life, or I begin to feel certain things or see certain things, then it's a call to me to say, okay, I have to be doing more work to build up my spiritual man, build
Mhm.
up my clarity, build up my discernment, so
Mhm.
that I'm able to um, understand, in which directions I should walk, or in which ways I should speak or not speak, or move or not move.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that requires time and intention. And I think it's easy to, because of the world we live in, it's easy to always just drift back to the physical level and
Yeah.
what we see, what's in
Of
front of
course.
us.
Absolutely.
Um, and that drift, I think, is very natural to happen. And so
Mhm.
it requires, I think, for me, intention to always come back to know this is actually the ground. And if I take care of this aspect of myself, this dimension of myself,
Yeah.
all the other pieces will fall into place,
Right.
and it kind of, in some ways, it takes the burden off of me as well, because
Mhm.
I don't feel like I have to control everything in the physical and
Mhm.
make
Mhm.
everything happen in a certain way, which is very stressful to do.
Yes.
I can just take care of my spiritual walk and take care of my relationship
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
God, and then be at peace as I walk through the valley and all these different things, and see
All these other
how
things
these
shall
things
be
work.
added unto you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All these things, and that's it's just such a real thing. But it sort of flips. It flips everything we know on its head, because
Yeah,
Mhm.
it does.
the
It
thing that's obvious is what is right in front of us, the things that we can see and touch and feel and hear. So to say, well, actually ignore that, instead pay attention to this other much more subtle thing first, and
Mhm.
don't really worry so much about those other things. They'll kind of take care of themselves, or I'll take care of those things for you. I think it's a process of faith, and it's something that as you walk in,
Every day,
it becomes
every moment.
stronger. It becomes stronger, and you're able to see more and more and understand more and more that process. And so for me, it also looks like boundaries as well
Mhm.
around my clinical work.
Mhm.
I can't help everybody all the time,
Mhm.
every day. And so really having boundaries around that work, and when I work with people, how I work with them, so that when I do, I can bring my full self to that process
Yeah.
and really help them in the most, thorough way.
And can I do a little secondary, Rochelle, and then I'm gonna be quiet, because it piggybacks on this. Just
Yes. Mhm.
I wondered, in addition to yourself and how you prepare, which is I can understand, just completely comprehensive, because it is a daily journey, and you just have to practice a lot of different measures in order to stay spiritually healthy. Um, I wondered if you have or solicit any of that additional help from community. Do you have people that you go
Yeah.
to?
Oh, for
Who,
sure. So I mean, I have my wife, right? My
okay,
family, my
got,
dad, my mom, my therapist,
got,
friends, and I have a small circle in terms of friends that like really understand and know what's happening. But
yes.
there are those people that I can go to,
Mhm.
when things are tough. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I didn't mention that, but that is a very critical part
Village.
of it.
Yeah.
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 Great, thank you.
That's
Oh,
really, really great. And how do you teach young people to appreciate the multi dimensions when we are raised in cultures that are focused on the unidimension? Like we talked about, like the silos of academic disciplines, but I think even the way we think about the supernatural and the spiritual is also very individualistic, right?
Mhm.
It's really hard for people to even consider, you know, three in one, however people put
mm,
that together, right? So
Mhm.
it's we are, if you're on this side of the world and you're like America and England in a Western culture where individualism is the standard,
mm,
right? But we come from cultures that are not like that,
Mhm.
especially if you're tapped into your ancestral cultures, right?
Mhm.
That fought to retain some of the cultures that were stripped away from us and ripped away from us. So from the South, for instance, like where Rasheeta is, there is a deep cultural awareness of the community and a collective spiritual identity, not just an individual identity. So when one person is ill, we're all ill, right? When one person is good, we're all good. That's sort of Ubuntu, like I am because you are, etc. And so in my background as well as yours, like West Indies, Caribbean, very similar, right? It's Black people are very similar as much as we're different. But we have a different awareness of the multitudes of seeing and being and understanding. And yet, because of the way we're educated, and you mentioned this earlier, the socialization of education tries to strip a lot of that away from us. So now we're even approaching our health in a very unidimensional way. But that's like your work is like doing the opposite of that. So my questions are kind of, there are many, but one of the questions is like, when the center that you're running right now, right, where you're dealing with trauma and as broad as that phrase is or that term is, how do you help young people connect to the various parts of themselves and their identity, particularly the ancestral parts that have been kind of either like, that doesn't matter, we don't need to connect to that, or, you know what I mean? Like, how do you connect young people back to some of these things that you've found a way to integrate and to kind of sustain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think some of it some of it has to be informational and some of it has to be experiential. And so I think from the informational standpoint, allowing them to really learn the history and the information about their identity. And I think once you start studying history or start learning the information, it's very clear to see the lineage, to see how these things have come about and why we arrived at the place that we are now and the lack of information that we have now. So I think that's part of it. Giving them exposure to things like the drum. So drum circle is a big part of what we do, both in here in DC, also in New Haven, and participating in the drum circle and feeling that energy, feeling that connectedness that happens in that, I think is something. Then there are also the practices like having them sit in different sorts of mindfulness practices and seeing what things come up for them and using that as an entryway. So like when you have a thought, when you hear your thoughts, there's both the speaker of the thought, but there's also the listener of the thought.
That's right. Yeah.
So who's the speaker and who's the listener?
Yes.
Right. And how do both of these parts of yourself? So there are at least two parts already there. There's the speaker that's generating the thought, and then there's the listener that hears the thought, right? How can we be curious about those two parts of ourselves already? And what does that tell us about our identity and our makeup? So those types of things are really interesting. Then just energy, like when you meditate or when you sit in certain practices, you can feel certain energy in your body. What is that about? How can we be curious about the source and the genesis of that? And so I think all of these things and being able to be in community and in conversation through these different experiences, and then connecting those experiences to the information and the knowledge, I think is a really powerful way to begin youth on that journey, which is one they ultimately have to take for themselves. But if they don't even know where to start or they haven't been shown the pathway, then it becomes really difficult. So I think that's a lot of how I approach it is really it's very soft-handed. It's really giving them information, giving them the pathway, giving them the experiences, allowing for the curiosity and allowing for very open conversation about all the different things that can come up, as a part of that.
That's so profound, because I think of like the intra communication, as you were talking about, like the one that to yourself. Are you listening to your own thoughts?
Yeah.
And how many tools have been developed, right? Affirmation is coming out of mindfulness, also coming out of spirituality, of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
It's not a new it's not a new spiritual practice. This is
Mhm.
old, right? It's just new terminology. But
Mhm.
the way you talk to yourself, the way you visualize your behavior can actually change your behavior, right? And so doing that listening first before starting something is we've lost a lot of this. Now we have to relearn it. Yeah, this makes me think about so many things. But the good news is that I feel like young people today are more receptive of your approach.
Yeah.
And I think they're more receptive because the church as an institution, there's some disconnect from oneself in that space. So
Mhm.
when I talk to young people, they appreciate their religious background, but they also feel disconnected from it.
Mhm.
And sometimes they interpret that disconnection as a disconnection from God or from the spirit source when it's not necessarily. And I remind them, I'm like, you're talking about an institution. You're not necessarily talking about the spirit, right? And
Mhm.
so making those distinctions, I think, also helps them to be able to tap into something that is innate, right?
Yeah.
It's innate, but it's like they push back, especially when they've had church harm or their mother or father has had church harm. And then it's sort of like this generational
Yeah.
resistance, right, to church because of this whatever, right? We know these things happen,
Yeah.
but to say that's not the beginning or the end of your spiritual development.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
can be a part of it, but it doesn't need to define it, right? And so I think a lot of young people are open to that, but then there's also like, well, where's community in that, right? Because the church at least gave us community,
Mhm.
whereas I think sometimes mindfulness can also be seen as an individualistic practice. I don't think that's where it started, but I think that's where
Mhm.
we've come. The sort
Mhm.
of co-option of these practices,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
have turned us into even something that was meant for us to do in community has now been up about me, right? So I affirm myself, I talk to myself, I meditate with myself, but I don't necessarily connect
Yeah.
to others. So how do you help people? And I love what you're saying. You're like, you're soft about it. You give information, and then you allow people to experience it, right? But in your information, in your teachings, what do you tell people, especially if you could talk to parents of adolescents who are watching their adolescents navigate their spiritual walk and their identity? What
Mhm.
do you say to them in particular about all of this?
Yeah. So I think one thing I didn't really mention, but most of the work that we do is in community.
Mhm.
So the group process is really central to like most of the work that I do.
Mhm.
Um, Again, I think there is some importance in doing the individual work. Jesus went
Right.
away for 40 days and 40 nights. He
Yes.
also did have 12 disciples, and he spent a lot of time with them, right?
Yes.
So I think it is both. It's both
Yes.
and like you have to
Yes.
do the individual work, but you also have to do the community work, and you
Yes.
actually really I think need both to have a fully developed not even just spiritual life, but just a fully developed healthy life requires both,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think for parents, especially of adolescents, it can be a challenging time because there's so much that they are having to work through. I think particularly in this environment and this climate, this particular time in human history
Yeah.
where they are um overwhelmed with access to information.
Mm.
um Not, and a lot of it is not actually good information or real true information.
Right.
Mhm.
They are trying to find their identity outside of their parents and outside
Yeah.
of everything that has been given to them. They
Yeah.
can see the flaws in the society that they're being handed. They can see where the climate is going. They can see the hypocrisy in the church. They can see all of these things. And they also can feel the things that they did feel maybe while they were in church. And so there's a real, I think, tension that they are often working through during that stage of development. And it requires, I think, a lot of patience. I think sometimes it requires some degree of letting go of the idea that we can control who they will be,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how they will be. I think that just speaking for myself as a parent can be a very painful thing to just reconcile. That like at the end of the day, like I actually cannot control who this other human being is going to be
Right.
and who they're going to become.
Yeah.
And because of the access to information, that process is happening earlier and earlier,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I think the best approach really is to have a great poker face, right? And understand that like it is more important to have a line of communication that is open for them to feel like you are a sounding board that will,
Mm.
even though you may have your opinions, and as a parent I think you have to share your opinions, and there are times where you have to have boundaries and say, well, you're still 13, so no, that is not something that can happen, or no, like you can't speak to me in that way, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you have to have those boundaries, but I think having as much flexibility as possible where there's an open ground for them to be able to really discuss all of the things that are happening and all the changes that are occurring, so that you can at least give them guidance. And even when they pretend they're not really listening, they are listening and they are
Yeah.
hearing. Um, and sometimes it takes some time for that seed to really fully be embedded. So having that patience and having the guardrails
Mm.
and allowing them to be hurt as well by life and be hurt by their decisions with the guardrails, right? And like
Ooh,
I tell my son's in college now, he's in the second year, and when we talk about certain things that he's made or certain bad decisions, I'm just like, that was not a great decision, and you want to minimize those decisions that the consequences are too harsh
that's
for you
right.
to course correct, right?
Yes.
So making some mistakes, making some bad decisions,
It's gonna
I'm
happen.
here for it. That's a part of
It's
the
gonna happen.
process. Like we don't have to feel shame about that. Like we all are going to do that.
Yeah.
But I need you to really be thoughtful about what risks you're going to take, because
Yeah.
there's some bad decisions that you can't just recover from. It's not just going to be a conversation that we can laugh about, a
Yeah.
few weeks later. Like it will transform the possibilities for your life. And so if
Mm.
you want this certain type of life, there's certain risks that you probably can't take because the chances or the costs are just too high. So how can you be thoughtful about, yes, push the boundaries, try these things. This is college, like
Yeah.
explore the world, but understand that like not every decision comes with an easy consequence, and some consequences are too harsh and will be too painful, and I don't want to see you do that.
Right.
And at the end of the day, like whatever you decide to do with your life, like I'm already at peace with the fact that I've done
All
the
that you
things that I could. I've
can.
given you the information.
Yeah.
I've always been honest with you. Like I've always given you the truth as I understand it,
Yeah.
and given you room to explore. So, I think that ability to keep those doors of communication open, because I think sometimes we know what's happening. We can see where they're going. We can see what's happening, and we really want to control. But because they're also trying to be differentiated, the more we try to control, the harder they feel like they have to push to differentiate themselves
Yeah.
from us and from everything they've known. And so I think that fine line and that fine balance of giving them the space to make those mistakes and go against the things that we want them to do, and
Yeah.
having that poker face and being able to hear the information and try not to freak out and have the conversation, that I think can just really set a powerful platform that allows for them to negotiate and navigate those things with you as an ally
Mm.
versus um as an adversary.
Yeah.
I
Man,
love that. I took so many notes.
whew, just like taking it in, just from a parenting perspective, like
Yeah.
just hearing that is helpful, especially because your son is in college, and I know Rochelle and I have school age children who are a bit younger, and I literally have been constantly reminding both my children about, I'm giving you what I know and what I feel is going to help you to the best of my ability, but I can't be with you all the time. And you're going to have to make decisions. And again, like you said, those decisions I'm hoping will not have negative consequences, or at least those that you can't come back from. And so last night, I told both my children not to watch K-pop Demon Slayer. I have an 8-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. And I saw when my daughter was on Netflix, I could see their profiles and what they're watching. And so I got on to her. So I was curious, just because they're putting the context of music and demons in play, right? They're literally putting it out there, and they're packaging it for children. I wondered how you approach that from a parental perspective, and also from a professional
mental health.
I mean, maybe I'm being a little selfish with this question.
No, I love it, because my daughter, as I didn't want her, and she explained it to me. You know, Mazzy's she's 7, but at this moment, but she's like, "Mommy, they're not demons." And she's like, "The good people are not doing. They're not doing." Right, of course. She's just trying to be persuasive, and because she knows what we stand for. So it was interesting hearing her try to justify it, because it also gave me indication of she actually knows what we stand for, right? So she realizes that this thing is potentially on the side that would, not want, mommy would not be okay with this, right? So that's what I picked up, even though, like, she was trying to persuade me.
But they're pushing back because they want to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, I push back. So I get it.
I get it. So, like you said, Rochelle, like your baby's saying, like, they're the good guys.
Not that bad. Yeah.
So I would love to hear your perspective, Dr. Azzi.
Yeah, I mean, so I have children in middle school, elementary school, and the youngest is a baby, a year and a half, almost 2 years. So I'm very mindful about what they watch. And I also understand that because of the age that we're in, there's only so much censorship that I can have for so long.
Bro.
Yeah.
And so I'm more interested in saying, okay, let's watch this together.
Yeah.
And what comes up, what is your understanding of what's happening?
Yeah.
And having that conversation, right? Because, I mean, again, in today's age, a lot of the information is now being put out there in a very blatant, explicit way.
Yeah.
And whether it goes over the head or not, it's there now. And things that I think, especially when it comes to the occult and certain practices within witchcraft and things like that, which you had to really go digging for to know about before. Yeah. Now it's really more placed out there in the open for you to know and see. And so I think understanding that, again, coming back to this idea that we do live in a spiritual world, there are demonic forces, and the music industry is full of it. Right, that is a reality for sure. And so how do we understand that? How is that juxtaposed to what we are looking at in Christianity, and the things that I've taught them that are outside of Christianity? Like, how do we make sense of all these realities that are part of our world? And where do you fit in? Where do you situate yourself in that? And how can exposing yourself to certain things be harmful for you? How can exposing yourself to certain things be helpful for you? And really just trying to have that open conversation. So they have seen it, they have seen it. I've watched it with them. And we've had conversations around the things that come up and that, came up in it. Yeah.
Okay. I love what you're saying here, because it reminds me of my mom, like, super wise, not a trained scientist, but now when I think back of all of her, like, parenting decisions, I'm like, oh, my mom was, like, just super wise, and she did read a lot, but I think a lot of just tapped in her intuition and spiritual development it was really strong as a mother, right? So things like, she would tell us, like, what you watch is what you become. What you watch are the things that will either desensitize. And so I'm a very sensitive person. I have a very sensitive brain. So I realized, she would say to me, like, you need to pay attention to how these things affect you. Right. So I tell my kids that too. Like, if you're watching this, and you wake up and you have nightmares, I'm gonna ask you what you watch before you sleep, or what did you watch during the day? And I was like, Mommy, I didn't watch anything. I'm like, okay, let's go through it. What were you listening to?
Something.
Because it was not, exactly, it didn't come from nowhere, right? These are things that are interacting with your brain chemistry, and you may be more sensitive than others. And so, like, I know I can't watch scary movies.
Me either. Never
I
could.
cannot. I can't. Like, I'm gonna be like this the whole time. I'm gonna waste my money, waste time. The sounds alone are gonna stay with me for so long. I'm just way too sensitive, right? And at the same time, I can handle really deep traumatic experiences of human beings. And people are like, how do you sit through that and listen to that? And it's a different kind of, it's not a fearful position for me to be in the presence of somebody who's dealing with intense grief or trauma. I can sit and handhold and walk with and be with, in terms of a level of compassion that I feel is a gift. But in terms of like entertainment that's there for trauma, I'm not that person, right? And so I tell my kids that, like, because I'm your mom, most likely your brain chemistry and your sensitivities will be similar to mine. So just be mindful of that. That's what I say to them. But my oldest, he watches like Dexter. He's 16.
Oh, like that creepy.
Listen, I don't understand it. I'm like, okay. And I tell him, I'm like, if I see your behavior acting up, or if I see that you are not sensitive enough to your siblings or whatever, I'm going to talk about what you're watching, right? Because there is a desensitization that's happening, and we don't want to be desensitized to things that are unkind, hurtful, harmful, etc. Because you're going to see your behaviors, kind of coming from that.
Yeah, I Dr. Azier, we could talk to you all day. So
I know.
If we could do two more things. One is, and Dolly, if you can kind of cue one of the videos that you chose for kind of a reaction to it, and it's around music and that thing. But it is October, and we are in the month of Halloween, right? So to your point about horror, it's just overwhelming the amount of horror stuff that's coming out. And so I am very sensitive. I cannot watch it either, because it does impact me negatively. Like, I do dream about, I'm a dreamer.
Yes.
And I have myself in dreams, like literally reacting. So anyway, my point to bringing that up is, do you have any strategies around this topic of horror and Halloween and all of the gory things that can kind of infiltrate the mind, where children may not be able to handle that, and how you might direct parents to be sensitive to that, and how it could have to me, some long-standing implications for children with that fear and the trauma that can be imposed if you're super sensitive like I am. Because maybe I'm going back to my childhood, because my cousins used to be like, oh, taking my hands down, like, look at it. So
I think to that point, the first thing is like, listen to your children. So it's like, let's say, oh, we want to watch this movie together as a family, but like the youngest person is like afraid of it. Don't force them to watch it. Like, either watch something else, or even maybe like put on something else for them in another room, or, but I think don't expose them to something that they are telling you they're not ready for, right? That can certainly be traumatic. I do think, as they get older, they might become more curious and want to see certain things. And again, I think there's a bit of judgment and relationship there to kind of understand, like, what's their level of maturity to distinguish entertainment and like a movie versus like life, real life. And children at different ages might reach a certain level of maturity in that understanding. I would always want to have watched something first before watching it with them. Especially if it's not made for kids. Like, I would watch it first to see what the content is, and then make a judgment about whether or not it's something that they may be able to handle. And I think watching it with them, so that you can also be discerning of like, what are their reactions to certain things? How are they? Because they may also want to be like, I want to be with the older people, so I'm going to, but you can also see like, how are they responding emotionally to what they're seeing?
Yes.
And if you can pick up on that, then, maybe make a pivot. But I would say in general, as they become more mature and they want to get exposed to things, I'm always for being the conduit for that exposure. Like, I would rather you be exposed to it within my frame
Yes.
and with my ability to co-process it with you,
Yeah.
than for you to feel like you have to go experience this on your own and not have my support and wisdom guiding you in the processing of whatever that is. And
Yes.
so I think, again, you have to know when you've gotten to that point, because I think there's a point where you have those boundaries and you say, no, not yet.
Right.
But there is also a point where, like, whether you say no or not, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Listen,
They're going to do it. Right?
we were kids before. We need to be honest about these things, right?
So at that point,
yeah,
being able to discern once they're at that point where, like, whether or not I say yes or no, they're going to find a way to
they're
watch
gonna
it.
find
They're
a
gonna
way
to do this.
Yeah,
At that point, I would rather be the frame and the conduit and the processing for that experience, so that we can talk about it. I
Yeah.
can see what's happening there. We're still in dialogue, and that creates now a certain level of actually intimacy and
Yeah.
openness between us and trust between us,
Yeah.
that really puts some deposits in that bank, so that, like, the next thing that maybe is a little bit more escalated, they're like, you know what? Well, the last time we were able to, like, have this experience together, and okay, so, like, maybe I can talk to my dad about this too, and see what he thinks, or I can talk to my mom about this, see what she thinks, and you again kind of become a co-pilot with them, and it's not as adversarial. Again, there are these limits that you have to have and boundaries, and it's like, if you're going to do that on your own, then I can't co-sign that,
Right.
and you will have to deal with those consequences. But I think as much as possible, trying to just keep widening that fence with them, so that you're always a part of the experience and can help them process it.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
That helped me so much. I appreciate that.
Great advice.
I
know we had a clip,
session, right?
Rasheeta says she owes you for that therapy session. She'll cash app you.
So we have one last thing, and that's a TikTok reactionary video. And I'll just say that it was about music, and that this person was responding. It's a very short clip, and so we'll respond to that, and then we will let you go reluctantly, because we could talk also, but we hope that you will return with us to talk about some of the other things we mentioned about some traditional ancestry. I think that would be super.
Like medication, psychedelics, part 2.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't get into that.
We didn't even get to that part, and I know, Rochelle, you would want to do that. So
it's gonna happen. But this is so good. I think the conversation about the music and children, I think, is extremely it's pertinent. It's very, very relevant.
Movies, music, for anybody who's questioning whether or not movies, music, shows, stuff like that can have any sort of spiritual impact on you, or you don't believe it. Okay. My friend is at a deliverance service. They're casting demons out of this woman. The demon starts talking to them in a voice that is not this woman's. Okay. It's clearly a demon. And finally, the guy just asks it, "How did you get into this woman?" And the demon says, "Buffy the Vampire Slayer." Do you remember that show? That used to be popular when I was younger. Okay, everybody just thought, oh, it's just a series. It's about some girl that's, slaying vampires or whatever. It's fine. It's not. When Jesus was healing people, he was casting demons out of them. Why? Because they don't belong there. They're not supposed to be there. You're celebrating Halloween? Wide open door. Come on in. Okay, it's a demonic holiday. You can cover it up with saint stuff and everything all you want, all these stories. I'm going to give you maybe the biggest tip you've ever had in your life. The devil, your enemy, adds just enough truth with stuff to get you to eat the whole bag. Jesus gave us authority over this stuff. It's not for us to be afraid of. If you don't know Jesus, if you have not accepted him as your Lord and Savior, you have no protection. You have no cover.
Okay. So, thoughts, comments?
I mean, go ahead. You're the
No,
guest.
no.
Go ahead, doctor. Go ahead, doctor.
I do think that the things that we engage in, right, the avenues into the soul, which are our senses,
Mm-hmm.
do open us up to be exposed to different things. I think two people can watch the same thing
Mm-hmm.
and they can have very different effects psychologically as well as spiritually.
Yeah.
And where you're vulnerable to spiritual influences is going to be very different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think, and then how that manifests, I think, is also going to be very different. And so I do think that there are certain influences and certain media that allow us to be susceptible to um, different kinds of energies that will have very dramatic impacts on us. But I don't think it's unilateral. And I think it really depends on who that person is, what are their prior experiences, their prior trauma, what is their spiritual covering, spiritual background, both in their own life, but also in their lineage, their ancestry. Like all of these things, I think play an important role in how we might be impacted spiritually by the media we consume. So I think if you want to be safe, the safest thing is to just guard the avenues, right? And like minimize exposure to anything that might have that sort of influence. And I think that everyone is in a different place, and there's certain people that are given the authority or given the position to walk into certain rooms or to have certain exposures and not be affected, whereas somebody else can't do that, And so I think it's really about self-knowledge and self-awareness, but I think safety is also always a good option. And so being mindful about what we ingest, I think, is important because it is an ingestion and we are taking it in. And whether it's a demon or whether it's just a new thought that's implanted into our subconscious that's going to impact how we behave or think, or feel, it is real that what we see is going to impact us psychologically and spiritually.
Awesome.
That was excellent. I love that response because it allows for nuance and critical thinking rather than being prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the pitfalls of some of the advice given, there's always pushback with shows, right? Especially shows that are related to like the spirit, like vampires and witches. I remember there was a show called The Craft back in the day. I'm dating myself, but I loved it. And one of the witches was Rochelle, and I totally resonated with her.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm a very spiritual person. So like I feel a lot of energies that scientifically, I'm also a scientist and I don't know how to explain it in any other way to say that there's presence here that I can't quantify. You know what I'm saying? But so talking to some of these people who are very comfortable with the parts of life that are not always visible, I actually feel very comfortable around people like that. And it could be my ancestry of having a grandmother who was considered, involved in obia or like a healer, right? So maybe that's what it is. That's where my comfort comes from. I don't know, but I think that negative things are not always the obvious. And I think a lot of the times we talk about the obvious things, right? And not enough time on the things that are so harmful, but may be below the surface. And so that's what I want young people to feel informed enough, like through the work of AZA and others, like informed enough to be present even in that sphere so that they can discern right? Not just what's on a television or a phone, but even energy around people and places, right? So that you can, yeah, it's just a deeper level of self-awareness. And I think that's what, that's what I got from what you said of like, again, listening and being in tune with your own thoughts, being in tune with how your body is reacting to something that you watch, or even reacting to people, right? And places like you can have physiological reactions to other human beings that are not pleasant, and you shouldn't ignore that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I want us to get back to. I think in our culture, a lot of our cultures, we actually had guidance like that. They pay attention. Your spirit is telling you something. Your body is telling you something. And now we're kind of just only on, well, what do I see? And I'm like, that's only one sense. There are many other senses beyond the five that we need to be tapped into. And that's the kind of conversation that I have with my kids too. And that I appreciate this woman's like sort of preventative message. And I think prevention is key, but I don't want it to be limited to just to the usual suspects, right?
Yeah.
The witchcraft and the this and the that and the. I'm like, that's it's actually deeper than that, right? Because most kids are not going to believe in vampires. They'll tell you that's fake in a second, but will they be able to discern bullying before it becomes so detrimental that they want to hurt themselves? Because there's signs of that first, right? So I'm like, if a vampire is the worst thing, right? Think about the vampires in your life. Like, who's sucking blood out of you? Who's sucking energy out of you? Who's sucking life out of you? So I kind of get into that space with my kids. Of course, they think mommy's a little
extra,
a little extra, a little off. But those are the conversations that we're having because, again, it's like, being so mindful that you can understand how you are showing up in this moment. And I think that also prevents some of the mental illness and the trauma to the brain when you have more awareness of what's going on. Then you know how to discern your environment and how to move.
Well, as I mentioned, Dr. Azier, thank you so much for being with us today. Do you have a final word you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think for me, actually, it's been very important to understand the power of gratitude, which we didn't really get to talk about. But this is something that I've had to practice myself even over the past few weeks, especially when we think about this idea of seeking the kingdom first. There are all these things that are happening around us and externally to us. And there's always reasons for gratitude. And it's such a superpower to be able to, in the midst of whatever trials you're going through, find the gratitude, find the thing that you can be grateful for. And there is always something, there's always a lot of things, right? But when you're in the middle of a trial or a crisis, it can be obscured. And you can tend to only focus on the crisis and the trial. And so I encourage myself, and I encourage anyone who's listening to this, to, in the middle of your trial or in the middle of your crisis, that's the time when it's actually most important to find that space of gratitude that's always in us, and try to be in that for a while and see how that also then starts to transform what's happening externally.
That's beautiful.
Yes. And with that, we will say goodbye.
Do you have a hopeful message, though, Rasheeta, in our tradition?
Say that again.
What's the hope?
What's the hope? Yeah. Okay. Are we going to ask that to Dr. Azier, or are you going to give the hope today?
I mean, I can give it. I think the hope is always our guest, right? Like, we bring on guests that bring us hope. That's number one. Number two, so, the work that you're doing, the way that you're integrating things that people want to keep separate, I think it's just so much breakthrough that's going to happen for people and young people. And that's a beautiful thing. And I love what you said about finding the gratitude, like look for it in the midst of crisis and trial, because it can obscure the gratitude. And I'm thinking about that with hope. Like, I think how difficult life can be, that it can obscure hope. but
Yeah.
that we fight to retain it no matter what. And we do that through spiritual practices. We do that through mindfulness. We do that through mental awareness and just being intentional about our mental health. So thank you for bringing such hope to our community today. We're grateful for the work that you do, and yeah, just keep doing it.
Yes. And we
Yeah,
are
thank you
going
for
to
having
have
me.
you back. So look for an email from us because we have so much more we want to speak with you about. But we hope you all got so much out of this like we did. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.